Hey, it's 4.4, Step 1, Structure and Form Beyond the Sonnet. The lesson objective is students will be able to interpret a poem by evaluating structure and form. So we're still on structure and form. These are stylistic aspects, authorial choices, pieces of dits, whatever you want to call them. And we're just focusing on these two for the first half of this unit because that's how important they are. Why are they so important? Well, just a reminder too about the images here. Structure I have represented by an X-ray, and then form by a silhouette. So when we look at structure, we're really digging into the poem and reading it and looking carefully at how words connect with other words. In form, we are kind of taking a glossed over look at the poem and just looking at how it appears from the outside. So why is this so important? Well, take a look at these two pieces of text. We have on the left an example of poetry and on the right an example of prose. And purposely you can't read them. And I did that just to show you how different they look. This takes totally different techniques to write and to analyze. When we write poetry, we determine the line lengths and break them where we want to. We determine the stanza lengths. We determine some spacing. And poets are also known for breaking a lot of rules. When it comes to prose, we don't determine the line breaks, and so it looks very different. All that we determine are the paragraph breaks, and so we indent at the beginning of a paragraph, and then where the lines break is totally arbitrary. So we don't analyze that with prose. Poetry is a different matter, and it's a very important aspect of poetry. All right, well, let's tackle these notes that we have. Enjambment. We talked about it a little bit already in some Should Do and Aspire to Do videos, but I wanted to make sure that everybody has the exact definition of this stuff. You can also get it in a link in Schoology. It's a structure and format document, which is also linked in the Understanding Poetry document as well. Well, it's the continuation. Enjambment is the continuation of a sentence or phrase across a line break, as opposed to an end-stopped line. So it's sort of the opposite of an end-stopped line. In the poem The Whitsun Weddings, we see some enjambment. Here are the 4 lines that I'm going to share with you. Oh, I guess I got 3 lines. And in each one, we have an example of enjambment where the sentence or phrase spills over to the next line. So here we have a hothouse flashed uniquely. Hedges dipped. That's not the end of the phrase. Hedges dipped and rose. And now and then a smell of grass. That's not the end of the phrase. A smell of grass displaced the reek of buttoned carriage cloth. All right, so that's enjambment. It spills over into the next line. Here's how we talk about it. We can say lines 1 through 3 are enjambed. Your software may not like the word enjambed, and it might swear at you and say it's not a word, and then you can swear back at it and tell it, yes, it is a word. You could say enjambment is used in lines 1 through 3. They'll like enjambment better than enjambed. The key, though, is not just to notice it, but to peruse the effect of this choice. So what are some different effects of enjambment? You could write about it this way. The enjambment creates a feeling of continuation, overflowing, movement. Those are all some possibilities. When I think of enjambment, I think of someone spilling paint on a tabletop, and then the paint drips off of the edge. That's enjambment. That dripping off. You might say the enjambed lines speed up the pace of the poem, because remember, when we read poetry, we pause at punctuation. So if there isn't punctuation at the end of a line, and if there isn't punctuation in the middle, we're going to really be going fast, right? So the more enjambment, the faster the poem goes, which might create a sense of urgency or tension or other emotion. How about Sajura? Sejour is a strong pause in the middle of a line. Most commonly, a caesura is punctuation somewhere else other than at the end of the line. So the key here is that there's a break in the middle of a line, which is an unnatural spot for a break. Typically, breaks would happen at the end of a line. So when they're in the middle, they're worth noting. Here's one of the most famous examples. To be or not to be? That is the question. And because of the break, especially the second comma, it really forces us to emphasize the word that. And then, maybe that's partly of what has made this line one of the most famous lines of all English literature. Another example, to mud and leaves in the mauled lane smelled sweet like blood. So we have Sajura here and here. This one is stronger because it's a period than the comma. Birds had died or flown. Their heads were weighted down by last night's lead, and eyes still drank the dark. Strong pause here, Sajura. All right. Oh, they trailed the night along the morning road. Some limped on sticks. So another strong pause there. How do you write about it? You can say there is a strong caesura in the middle of lines 2, 4, and 5. The caesuras in lines 2, 4, and 5 create strong breaks. And we always have to get to the effect. We're always exploring the effect. That is so important with dealing with these authorial choices. So the caesura allows the reader to pause and see the contrast of the next part of the line, or the caesura creates a break between the two ideas, or the caesura forces a pause to soak in the point that, or the caesura, whatever the reason is for this particular strong break. And you have to go on to determine that, right? This is when we start going past the undebatable. To making some debatable claims. And it has a really important connection to this technique of isolating words, which is something that modern poets do quite a lot. And so I wanted to talk to you about the different ways that's done. It can be done with caesura. I don't think we have examples. I suppose we have an example of caesura here, don't we, in line 3. So we have if it be wild is isolated in a way between two commas. Maybe there's something you can make of that. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Down here in lines, what is this? Is this 17 or 18? If they were all, we have the commas that isolate this line. Other ways to isolate are where the lines are broken. So maybe there isn't punctuation in the middle of the line, but it's just broken, so it becomes short. The line lengths themselves. So slow is definitely isolated because of its short length. And when you look at it visually, it's separated from everything. And then you look at, okay, well, what is the effect of that? Well, it's emphasizing slow. And then we have the exclamation mark to really emphasize it even more. And of course, that connects back to the speaker's desire to slow down October. Should waste them all is the other line that is isolated because of its length. And with should waste them all, I guess with both of these, they are isolated with punctuation marks as well, because we have a punctuation mark before it and after it. And so when we read the poem, we pause, and should waste them all is isolated even as we hear it, not just as we see it. Spacing also can be used to isolate words. Stanza breaks can be used. These are all different ways to isolate pieces of the poem. Margins is the last. How can form and structure mirror content in poetry? Well, we've done this a few times now, and so let's go over what we have already done. October is about wanting time to slow down to avoid worse days ahead, which is reflected in the slow pacing of the poem, caused by 21 end-stopped lines. Notice I didn't say represented. Avoid represented or symbolized, Because when we talk about symbolism or representing, it is a very different technique. And literary analysis is all about language. We have to be very precise. So I think a really good word to use is reflected or mirrored or enhanced. Once you start using words like represented or symbolized, then you have to talk about a symbol. You have to talk about how one thing actually stands for something else. And in this case, there's a figurative significance, but it's not quite that black and white. It's not quite that simple of an equation. It's more complicated. Not to keep is about trying to control emotions when everything is out of control, which is reflected in sentences that don't fit in the lines and spill over the next. So again, I'm using reflected. And don't feel bad using these verbs yourself. Don't feel like you have to come up with your own verb. Use it. I'm trying to help you here. The silken tent is about the complexities and multitudes of relationships, which is reflected in the long, complex sentence that stretches over 14 lines. All right, so what are we going to look for in form? Well, this is the same as what I talked to you about in the stanza, the sonnet video. So you can copy them from that document or copy them from the video, either way. But it's the same things we're looking at. How does the poem look visually on the page? How many stanzas? How many lines? Are any isolated? Are some lines longer than others? What patterns do you see? Is there any other unusual aspect of the poem's silhouette? After reading the poem, how does the form relate to the content? For structure, we're looking at what is the poet's focus of attention? How is it organized? Where are the transitions or changes? How is it divided up? How is the stanza organized? All of these different things that we've already looked at. How do all of the different pieces relate to each other? How are the sentences structured? Are there any repetitions of certain kinds of sentences? End stopping, enjambment, Sajura, where are those? And how does structure relate to the content? All right, the next video will be specifically about a poem I want you guys to tackle. Thanks for taking notes on this.